There will never be another one like Don Shula. Never. And that's not sticking our neck out any farther than Shula's famed tan and jutting jaw. 347 wins. Let that sink in. How good for how long would you have to be? Well, you'd have to get started real young, as Shula did at the age of 33, and coach half your life, as Shula has done until he's 66. You'd have to get to the playoffs in 4 different decades, as Shula did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. You'd have to make half a dozen Super Bowls, probably have to win 2, maybe even throwing in a perfect season along the way. You'd have to coast through 8 presidential regimes. When Shula started as head coach of the Baltimore Colts in 1963, John F. Kennedy was in the White House. He won an NFL championship in 1968, while Lyndon Johnson viewed from the Oval Office. His 2 Super Bowls were won while Richard Nixon was president. In fact, he even outsmarted Tricky Dick, who sent a play used by Redskins coach George Allen to no avail in Super Bowl VII. On through the Ford and Carter administrations, to Ronald Reagan's 2 terms, during which Shula appeared in 2 more Super Bowls, on through Bush and Clinton. Shula played no favorites, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. To win 347 games, you need to be a great teacher. It was this trait of which Shula is perhaps the most proud. But then again, his rookie season as defensive back in the NFL came with the Cleveland Browns in 1951 under one of the greatest teachers ever, Paul Brown. Teaching can make even the best players become better, and as Shula will readily admit, the best players will make the head coach greater. There are 12 Hall of Famers who played for Shula, including his first quarterback, Johnny Unitas, wide receiver Raymond Berry, and running back Lenny Moore, all of whom were 30 when Shula became Baltimore's head coach at the age of 33. Defensive end Gino Marchetti was 3 years Shula's senior at 36. Another Shula credo was win, and more importantly, lose with class. Obviously, his players have done plenty of the former, but they've had many a bitter defeat. Shula's teams lost twice as many Super Bowls, 4, as they won. Perhaps most important was his adaptability. Even some of football's most successful coaches played one certain style, like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But Shula understood his players' abilities and changed his style accordingly. In 1972, Miami, behind Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, and Mercury Morris, ran for over 2,900 yards, then a record. In Super Bowl VII, Bob Greasy threw 11 passes. In Super Bowl VIII, he threw just 7. A decade later, in 1984, Dan Marino threw 48 touchdown passes and over 5,000 yards. And in Super Bowl XIX, he threw the ball 50 times. Bum Phillips's quote sums it all up. Don Shula can take his'n and beat Ewan, and he can take Ewan and beat his'n. If you look at the NFL's top 12 coaches by wins, with Shula obviously number 1, check out his record against the others. George Halas, Tom Landry, Chuck Noll, Paul Brown, Bud Grant, you name them. Shula has a winning record against every one of them. 2 he never faced, and against 1, okay, he's 500. But if you add it up, it comes to a staggering 47-22-1 against the best in the NFL. The images of Shula's 33 years roll by as if you're watching the history of the NFL itself. The Colts of the 1960s, 1 up and 1 down in NFL championship games. Tom Matty with his plays on his wristband, almost beating the Packers in overtime in the 1965 playoffs. The 1967 team that went 11-1-2 but didn't make it to the postseason. And the 1968 crusher against the Jets in Super Bowl III. On to Miami, where in year 2 of 26, 1971, Gary Yepremian's field goal on Christmas Day brought down the Chiefs in football's longest game. And Dick Anderson's interception return against the Colts in the AFC title game featured 8 perfect blocks, which for our money is the greatest total team football play we have ever seen. 1972, perfection, 17-0, brute strength on the ground. Nick Bonaconti, Manny Fernandez, Jake Scott, and the no-name defense. Even Garrow's gaffe in the Super Bowl, nothing could stop them. Combined with 1973 equals 32-2 and 2 Super Bowls over 2 years. It's doubtful the 72 season nor this 2-year run will ever be equal. Who knows how many more Super Bowls these teams would have won if Zonka, Kick, and Paul Warfield not opted to bolt to the WFL. 1981, Bilk and Ladder fueling a 24-point comeback in that heart-stopping playoff loss to the Chargers. Another Super Bowl attempt in 1982 with Woodstock at quarterback, David Woodley and Don Strachan. The wonderful pass-happy 14-2 1984 club with Marino and the Marx Brothers, Shula's final Super Bowl appearance. 1985, the most rousing night the Orange Bowl has ever seen. The 12-0 Bears came to town, but with Shula's legends lined up on the sidelines, Marino was at his finest, giving Chicago their only loss, preserving the 1972 Dolphin legacy. Even last year in the playoffs, when the Dolphins beat Joe Montana in his final game. It seems like this should go on forever. But in a season when one institution crumbled before our very eyes, the Cleveland Browns, The same thing is happening to another one, a native Clevelander, Don Shula.